Living in an HOA-run neighborhood is already a nightmare, but having Karen as the HOA president? That's pure suffering. She wasn't just your typical rule-enforcing, clipboard-wielding Karen, she was a tyrant. Every week, she found new and absurd reasons to fine people. One guy got fined for having a garden hose visible from the street. Another got slapped with a penalty for excessively shiny solar panels. But me? Oh, I won the HOA lottery. I got fined for breathing too loudly. Okay, not in those exact words, but pretty close. I had stepped outside my house one evening to enjoy the cool air after a long day of work. Just standing on my porch, sipping my coffee, minding my business. Next thing I know, Karen storms up to me, HOA rulebook in hand, and an expression that could sour milk. "Excuse me," she snapped, her surgically arched eyebrows twitching. "I couldn't help but notice that you were making noise." I blinked. Noise. Yes, I was enjoying a peaceful evening, and then I heard this awful, obnoxious sound. What sound? She narrowed her eyes. Breathing. At first, I thought she was joking. But Karen? Joking? Never. "You're breathing too heavily. It's disturbing the neighborhood ambience," she said, flipping open the HOA handbook like it was the Bible. According to Section 14C, unnecessary disturbances that disrupt the community environment shall be subject to fines. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It never came. "So let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You're fining me. For breathing." "For excessively breathing," she corrected. It was loud and disruptive. I nearly choked on my coffee. "Karen, are you serious?" She smirked. "The fine is $75. Pay within 48 hours or I'll double it." And with that, she turned and strutted away, leaving me dumbfounded. At that moment, I knew I couldn't let this slide. If she was going to pull nonsense like this, I was going to fight fire with fire. And that's when an idea hit me, a brilliantly petty, legally airtight idea. If Karen wanted to fine me for breathing, I was going to bill her for existing. I wasn't about to let Karen's ridiculous fine slide. If she thought she could nickel and dime me over something as basic as breathing, then it was only fair I return the favor. And so, I spent the next 2 days crafting my masterpiece, a legally sound, professionally formatted invoice, charging her for the very act of existing. The document was titled Existence Maintenance and Nuisance Tax Invoice, issued to HOA President Karen. I itemized every single charge. Oxygen consumption tax, $50 per day. Visual pollution fee, $30 per day. Auditory disturbance surcharge, $45 per day. General Karen tax, $100 flat fee. I even threw in a late payment penalty clause, just for good measure. If she didn't pay within 48 hours, the total would double. Satisfied with my work, I printed the invoice, stamped it with an official payment due seal, and slid it into an envelope labeled Urgent, HOA President only, before dropping it into her mailbox. The next day, I got my popcorn ready and waited for the explosion. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 9 a.m., a high-pitched screech rang through the neighborhood. Moments later, Karen stormed up to my door, invoice in hand, her face redder than a fire hydrant. "What is this?" she shrieked, waving the paper so violently I thought it might catch fire. "Oh," I said innocently, leaning against my doorway. "That's your invoice. Payment is due in 48 hours. You think this is funny? You can't charge me for existing." I crossed my arms. "Oh, but you can fine me for breathing?" She sputtered. "That's different. That's a violation of HOA rules." I shrugged. "And this is a violation of my personal peace. I believe that falls under unreasonable disturbances, which is the same nonsense rule you cited against me." Her jaw clenched so tightly, I thought she might crack a tooth. "This is illegal." "Is it?" I mused. "Because technically, I've only issued you an invoice, not a fine. I'm not enforcing anything. But if you refuse to pay, I could escalate it to a legal matter." She gasped. You wouldn't. I grinned. I don't know, Karen. You love enforcing the rules. Maybe it's time you learned how it feels on the receiving end. Her hands trembled as she crumpled the invoice. This is harassment. No, Karen, this is accountability. She stomped her foot. I'll report this to the HOA board. They'll have you evicted for this kind of behavior. I chuckled. Oh, please do. I'd love to explain to the board how you fined me for existing first. She gaped at me, realizing she'd backed herself into a corner. I suggest you pay up, Karen, I added, smirking. Because unlike your HOA fines, my invoice actually makes sense. With an incoherent scream of frustration, Karen spun on her heels and stormed away. Little did she know this was just the beginning of her nightmare. Karen had two choices: pay the invoice or admit defeat. Unfortunately for her, she was Karen, so admitting defeat wasn't in her DNA. The next morning, I woke up to find a bright red notice taped to my door. Immediate notice of violation. You are hereby ordered to appear before the HOA Disciplinary Committee for issuing fraudulent invoices and harassing the HOA president. Failure to comply may result in fines and potential expulsion from the community. Signed, HOA President Karen. I burst out laughing. She really thought she could discipline me? Oh, this was going to be fun. So, I did what any sane person would do. I put on my best suit, grabbed a briefcase, and strolled into the HOA meeting like I was about to sue the entire organization. The HOA board consisted of 5 people, but they were all just Karen's little minions. As soon as I walked in, Karen smirked like she had already won. This meeting is now in session, she announced. We are here to discuss a blatant act of fraud against the HOA. I cleared my throat. Actually, we're here to discuss 2 blatant acts of fraud, one committed by the HOA president and one she alleges against me. Karen's smug expression faltered. Excuse me. I pulled out a folder with my copy of her fine against me for breathing and dramatically placed it on the table. Before we discuss my so-called fraud, let's examine this official fine I received for breathing excessively. A few board members exchanged confused glances. Karen's smile twitched. That's not the issue at hand. Oh, but it is. I leaned forward. Because if issuing ridiculous, baseless charges is considered fraud, then surely fining someone for an involuntary bodily function qualifies, don't you think? The HOA treasurer, Mr. Patel, frowned. Wait, she fined you for breathing? Yes, Mr. Patel, I said. And if we're holding people accountable for fraudulent financial actions, then surely we should be reviewing the legality of that fine first, correct? A murmur ran through the board. Karen's smirk was gone. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You sent me a fake invoice for existing. I smiled. Ah, but you see, my invoice is a personal invoice. I didn't claim it was an official HOA fine, unlike your fine, which abused HOA authority to financially target a resident. Karen's face turned tomato red. I sat back, crossing my arms. So, I ask you all, who's the real fraud here? The room went silent. Finally, Mr. Patel sighed. Karen, did you really fine him for breathing? Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Another board member, Susan, pinched her nose. Karen, this is exactly why we keep getting complaints about you. Karen jumped up. This is outrageous, she screeched. I am the HOA president. I make the rules. Actually, I said, reaching into my briefcase and pulling out the HOA bylaws I had printed the night before, the board makes the rules. Not you. I flipped to a specific page and slid it across the table. And, according to Section 6A.3, any HOA fine issued without a valid, legally sound reason is considered an abuse of power, which, by the way, is grounds for removal from office. Karen's face drained of color. The board members all turned to her, now fully realizing that she had been using the HOA like her personal dictatorship. Mr. Patel sighed. Karen, we need to discuss this in private. Meeting adjourned. I smirked. standing up. Well, this was productive. Oh, and Karen, your invoice is still due in 24 hours. Don't forget. Her eye twitched so hard I thought she might explode. As I walked out, I knew I had struck a nerve, but I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Karen was in full meltdown mode. After the HOA board meeting, word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The woman who spent years terrorizing residents with bogus fines and ridiculous rules had finally been called out. And not just called out, publicly embarrassed. Neighbors who had been victims of her nonsense were suddenly emboldened. People started talking, sharing their experiences. One guy revealed that she fined him for having a car that was too blue. Another woman said Karen charged her for walking her dog at an inappropriate hour. And then, the real kicker, someone found out Karen had been pocketing some of the HOA fines for herself. Yep, fraud, embezzlement, corruption. By the time I woke up the next morning, my inbox was flooded with messages from neighbors thanking me for exposing her tyranny. But there was one message in particular that made my day. Urgent HOA notice. Due to recent concerns raised regarding HOA financial practices and abuse of authority, an emergency board vote will be held this evening to discuss Karen's removal as HOA president. I nearly did a victory lap around my house. But just as I was celebrating, I heard a furious knock at my door. I opened it to find Karen standing there, trembling with rage, holding my invoice in her fist. "You," she screeched. I grinned. "Good morning, Karen. Here to pay your invoice." "You think this is funny?" she barked. "You've ruined me." I leaned against the doorframe. "Oh no, Karen. You ruined yourself. All I did was shine a light on the mess you made." Her eyes burned with hatred. "I am still the HOA president. And I will make your life a living hell." I smirked. "Oh, I'm very interested to see how you'll do that after tonight's vote." Her nostrils flared. "They won't remove me. They need a majority vote." I grinned. "And after all the dirt that's come out about you, do you really think you still have the votes?" She faltered. Her confidence wavered just for a second, and in that moment, I knew she was scared. So I twisted the knife. "You know," I mused, "you could avoid all this trouble. If you pay my invoice and resign quietly, I might be willing to forget about reporting the money you've been pocketing." Karen paled. Her lips trembled as she stared at me, realizing she had no way out. "You," she whispered, her voice shaking with fury. I tilted my head. "Tick-tock, Karen. The HOA board meets in just a few hours. What's it gonna be?" She whirled around and stormed off, gripping my invoice so tightly her knuckles turned white. That's when I knew she was desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. I had her right where I wanted her. The HOA emergency meeting was set for 7 p.m., and by 6:45, the clubhouse was packed. I took my seat near the front, arms crossed, watching as Karen marched in like a dethroned dictator. Her usual smug expression was gone, replaced with a tight-lipped, panicked look. She knew this was the end. The HOA board members sat at the long table, looking serious. Mr. Patel, the treasurer, cleared his throat. "We are here to address multiple concerns raised about the actions of our HOA president," he announced. "This includes allegations of improper fines, abuse of power, and," he looked directly at Karen, "possible financial misconduct." Karen jumped up. "These accusations are ridiculous. I have done nothing wrong. I was simply enforcing the rules." Susan, another board member, cut her off. "Karen, you find a man for breathing." The room erupted in whispers and chuckles. Karen's eye twitched. "That was a misunderstanding." Mr. Patel ignored her. "We have also received bank statements and payment records indicating that several HOA fines issued under Karen's presidency were never deposited into the official HOA account." The murmurs grew louder. That was it, the smoking gun. Karen turned ghost white. That's a lie, she screeched. I was just keeping things organized. I stood up, clearing my throat. Karen, would you like to pay my invoice now? Or should I just add it to the list of fraudulent charges? The whole room burst into laughter. Karen lost it. This is a witch hunt, she shrieked. You can't do this to me. I built this neighborhood. I am the HOA. Susan rolled her eyes. We've heard enough. She turned to the board. Let's put it to a vote. The vote took less than 30 seconds. 4-1. Karen was officially removed as HOA president. And the best part? As soon as the vote was finalized, Mr. Patel folded his hands and said, Karen, due to the evidence of financial misconduct, we will be turning this matter over to the authorities. Her face collapsed. You can't, she gasped. You have no proof. Mr. Patel raised an eyebrow. Actually, we do. It turns out one of your own board members, he gestured to Susan, who smirked, happens to have a security camera inside the HOA office. And we have you on video, altering financial records. The room exploded. Karen staggered backward, her entire world crashing down around her. No, you can't do this. You can't. Suddenly, 2 uniformed police officers stepped into the room. Karen Reynolds? One of them asked. Karen turned completely pale. You're under arrest for fraud and embezzlement, the officer said. We'd like you to come with us. I've never seen karma move so fast. Karen screamed as the cops grabbed her by the arms and hauled her out of the room. As they dragged her away, I waved. Oh, Karen, I called. Don't forget you still owe me for that invoice. The whole room erupted in laughter. Karen? She was too busy screaming to respond. And with that, her reign of terror was officially over.